Two. Welcome to the 2-Month Review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take one giant book, break it down section by section, bit by bit, talk about it, analyze it, make jokes about it, have fun, other things that I don't remember what to do. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
Hi, Chad. I just read a book that says 3 ways to do podcasts, and the first way is that you're supposed to pre-record the introduction.
Yeah, I know. I got that message yesterday on our bonus episode too. After I didn't screw that one up as badly. This one was particularly bad, but fair. We had a particularly troubling time getting this all to record. So.
Good to be here, Chad. I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you.
And we are joined this week by special guest Katie Whittemore, who is coming to us live from Valencia, Spain. She is a translator that's doing a bunch of books for us, but I'll let you introduce yourself, Katie.
Hi, hello, I'm Katie.
I think Brian should ask these questions because I know the answers to them, but you're doing a book for us right now.
I am, yes. I'm in the final stages of a Sarah Mesa manuscript, 4x4, due July 15th.
It's a very specific date that you are very well aware of.
Yeah, I have that in my mind. Yeah, I'm working on that. That's actually going to be my first translated novel, and it's been going well, and I'm excited. And then we have a couple other projects that we'll be doing together, and I have a few other things that are not with Open Letter.
Those are probably the ones that people would be more interested in, but real quick. So the two of our projects actually got announced on Twitter yesterday.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah. So Javier Serena, you introduced us to, so you can explain these two books.
Okay, so Javier is a young Spanish novelist. He's in his 30s, and he has 3 novels, but 2 that we'll be working on, and one is they're kind of connected. They both take sort of as a premise this interest in genius and in writing and these sort of cult figures that had very different paths ultimately. And one of the characters is based on Roberto Bolaño, and it's sort of based on like those last years of his life right before he became famous and when he started to have like a great deal of literary success in Spain, right before he died. So there's sort of like this fictionalized biography of a Bolaño-like figure. And then his other novel is really cool. It's also about a writer, also sort of like sort of a genius, but someone who did not have the success that Bolaño had, and in fact is like considered, a cursed writer or a damned writer who's also real, and his name's Alyosha Cole. And so Javier is sort of exploring these 2 figures, and the writing is really beautiful and sort of classical, and it's very exciting. It'll be cool. It's kind of they're a neat sort of compendium. And yeah, so that's the Javier stuff.
I'm very excited about doing all those. All these books. And then your 2 other ones might be of interest too. Plug them. Let's get all the plugs out now before we get into like the absolute insanity of this book.
Okay. Yeah. So after the Sarah Mesa one for Open Letter, I have a novel by Aroa Moreno Duran, who's another young Spanish writer. And that book is coming out with Tinder Press in the UK. It's an imprint of Headline. And that book is called The Communist Daughter. And it's the story of like a young woman who's the daughter of Spanish communist refugees, immigrants living in East Germany. And it sort of follows her path from the building of the Berlin Wall until its fall and what happened with her. And it's a bit of like a love story as well. And that's great. And then the other one, which I'm really excited about, is called World's Best Mother, or The Best Mother in the World. I don't know yet which title they're going to go with.
What's your vote, Brian? And we got into this yesterday in the bonus podcast where Ben Lindbergh was like, why don't publishers do like A/B testing or like cover things like you could get data and like do research on this, but instead you don't. It's like,
Ryan. So what do you prefer? Do you prefer the best mother in the world or world's best mother?
I prefer just gut reaction, world's best mother.
Same.
Yes, you win.
Yeah. There was only one correct answer.
Yeah. Because one's like something funny you'd put like emblazoned on a coffee mug, and the other you would hand stitch and put on the wall. And I like the coffee mug version better.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so that's a great book. That's by I'm hoping for World's Best Mother as well. So if you're listening, World Editions, then you got video.
I think they might.
They might be. So that's an awesome book. It's by Nordia Labardi, who has another novel called Things That Shine When They're Broken, which was about the Madrid train bombings in the early, it was 2003.
That sounds pretty cool too.
So anyway, this World's Best Mother is sort of like, it's a bit of autofiction, it's a bit of social commentary, it's a bit of, it's fictionalized account of this young woman's sort of like path in motherhood. It's really, by turns, like funny and heartbreaking and totally true. I can say that as a mother of two young kids, that I was just like reading it and nodding out loud. And I mean, laughing out loud and nodding. Yeah, so that's great. And that's kind of due next, and then the Javier projects. And I think that's and Alyosha Cole, the actual Alyosha.
Ton of stuff. And there's like pieces coming out in various magazines.
Yeah.
Had a great deal of success in a very short period of time.
Yes.
So congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah, good Lord.
It's been great.
So I don't know if there's anything else you want to ask, Brian, before we get into Sjón. No,
that's impressive. My first book's coming out in July, and then 18 others come out in the next 2 days. Like, whoa, okay.
It's sort of like your career. It's sort of like Doug Feldnick's career.
Yeah, that's right.
Doug Feldnick's ready to go.
But see, I don't have to actually make anything up myself, so I should be able to work in quadruple the time, because I'm not inventing it.
Sure. I don't understand translation, which I'm fascinated to be a part of any conversation with it. So I think what you guys do and publish is amazing. So.
Well, likewise.
Very cool. I feel like your book is part of this chapter here. There's one particular section. There's one particular paragraph that is like the summary of Joytime Killbox for me.
Oh, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear what that is.
It's not. It's really not. But we'll get there.
No,
so
how can we make this about me? Now I'm interested.
Okay, yeah, we'll get there. So for the part of the intro that I skipped is that this season is about CoDex 1962 by Sjón. It is a book that is made up of 3 volumes. We have finished the first 2 volumes, which are written many years before the 3rd volume, which is the one that we're going to start today, which was originally published in 2016. And this book came out in 2018, so it was translated all fairly quickly. And this 3rd section is called I'm a Sleeping Door, a science fiction story. And up to this point, we've had a section set during World War II in which a Czechoslovakian Jew escapes through Germany with a golem that he brings to life with this woman's help. He gets to Iceland, but the gold that was in the belly button for the baby to make it alive was stolen by these 2 people. There's a whole crime and heist bit that goes on in volume 2 in which he gets the gold back. There's someone that's murdered. There's funny bits. It's wild. It's all over the place. And then he brings the baby to life. And part 3, I'm a Sleeping Door, opens now in the first part is in April 1st of 1961, but it's set in more contemporary times and finally reveals to us over more directly who's been talking, because we've had a series of sections in which there's and someone talking to an interlocutor and it's not clear as to what's going on, and it starts to become clear in this section that we're going over today, which covers the first 8 chapters of this 3rd part. But it all begins with sorry Katie, but it all begins with a very, very like lewd erotic sections in a row. Two chapters that are pretty aggressive for normal stuff.
What are you, Victorian? There's nothing lewd about the sexual expression between 2 consenting people, Chad.
This is true. This is very true.
Put some socks on the piano legs so you don't get aroused. You freaking prude. Come on. No, it's just like sex.
It's just fucking. Like these first 2 chapters are just straight up fucking. So what happens, what's interesting though is the beginning part. So if you remember this, yeah, I'm sure you do, Brian, because you remember everything, that we talked about how the first two chapters, the first two parts were like origin myths of different kinds. There was the one about, now I don't remember what they are, but there was the second one I remember had the chicken and the ogre, or the berserker that was jumping through land and came out, and that became the town of Kluckensburg or whatever. And then this one is maybe a different sort of origin story, and maybe two different sort of origin stories is what I was thinking. Like in the first part, in the first chapter, on the first page, it talks about how this form is going to be a story and dialogue with all other major types of narrative, with that long resounding roll call that encompasses everything from visionary poems and medieval manuscripts to futuristic films, from topsy-turvy verses to the four gospels, from folk songs of drug-induced ghosts to gossip columns in the papers, from travel accounts written by intelligent women to comic strips about mutant children, from pop lyrics to publications on psychology, from pornography to chess commentary. So that its clarity and profundity. So in its clarity and profundity, my introduction will be on par with the best scholarly accounts by those gifted anthropologists who can, by means of a complex yet clear line of reasoning, instantly convey their readers back across time to the image of a hand left by one of our foremothers on a cave wall in Altamira. Which, so he seems like, I was thinking with this like bit, is creating this like whole epic sense. And it's almost like creating an epic sense for this book. Because we've had all this stuff about creating the child that's going to be like the first male who's like for peace instead of war, and a new sort of human being. And seems like it's a new sort of epic narrative that the trilogy is building up into, maybe.
I don't know. That was a lot of talking. I have no idea what.
This is usually.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good to me.
Welcome. I'm having my first cup of coffee, man. We're getting right. Have you ever been to Altamira, Katie?
I've not.
Spain.
I've not been to Altamira, but it is in Spain. Yes. Yeah, I think I loved this opening part when he's saying, you know, like what he wants to do, you know, above all is establish this time and place. And I think that's really interesting because he's trying to root this narrative, which is really multifaceted in a time and place, and elevate it to this level of the sort of the universal. Yeah. In a way. Which I think is cool. I also love like following that when he says, this is how I picture it happening. And so it's interesting because like we know that with that sort of little bit of an introduction, this is an imagination as well. Like it is myth making in the sense that this is someone's imagination and narrative as opposed to just like a recording of facts of what happened. Like, you know.
It's interesting too, because the person who's speaking will later say that he remembers everything because he was born fully formed, essentially, which is curious too.
But he was
although he wasn't born at this point in time.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what he must imagine, and everything from like, you know, his birth on, he can recall with acid clarity.
So what he imagines is Mrs. Thornstein, who. Well, before we get there, one of my favorite names is
Thorstein's son.
Oh, whatever I said. I'm sorry. I wanted to go to the Thors, which is my favorite name in this whole book, the baritone. But Mrs. Thorstein's son goes out and gets hers. First from Taxi 69, of course.
Okay, I do want to just interject and be clear that she doesn't actually get hers, and that's kind of the point.
Fair. You take the lead on this. It's all yours.
No, but I love that. I love that she's like so disappointed. There's like this raw sex, like with these random men. And every time she just has to like sort of sigh and move on and find another man because it's just not enough.
She's not satisfied. Yeah. Well, if there's one thing we know about men,
there's one thing about Mrs. Thorsteinson.
But she takes control. She is what I was thinking, that she's going out to get laid.
She's on some sort of mission.
She's on a mission. And this is the part that I said I wrote Brian's book. Never before has a woman been so eager for him, but when she thrusts her hips forward and sucks his penis into her hot loins, he's incapable of satisfying either of them. There's a minute of frenzied lust. Then sparks fly before his eyes as the sperm spurts out and quick jerks into her vagina. It's over. I wrote Brian's book next.
That's my book. What?
because all the male failures that are like,
oh yes,
like the attempt, and like it's always just like coming up short and just like oh, this is gonna be, and then it's just like splatter out.
One quick part.
Yes,
Oh my God.
the various forms of impotence that takes place in our lives, for sure.
Yep. So
Okay, I'll give you that. That's fair. Maybe not so visceral as that, but yes, that is kind of a theme that that goes throughout.
I'm just trying to help you out. People like this. People love 50 Shades of Grey, man. The Joytime Killbox has like things like this. People are gonna buy that. Snap it up.
Yes.
Make it into a movie, a trilogy. So yes. So I don't know if there's anything. What were you gonna add something there, Katie?
No, I mean, I loved like the little italicized parenthetical descriptions of the scenes. Like, you know, like there was one that I thought was so funny, the smutty interlude, Lady on the Prowl. I just thought
Lady on the Prowl.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting that we, like this final encounter, you know, we get the backstory of this woman, you know, this like sort of femme fatale and her fur and everything. And then like what you find out is that like she was raped as like a young girl and had this sort of like precarious life in these different odd jobs until she becomes like Mrs. Thorstenson, who's like this, you know, middle-class woman in her 30s. But I think that's probably, you know, I would assume important for what comes later, maybe.
Yeah, there has been like the variety of like the male assaults that have come up both last season with Radiant Terminus and in here, and like the results of those have always been kind of an interesting theme or motif that comes up. That is, it's always disturbing. Like to have that described in there. There's one other thing that's worth noting here that it starts to add into. If you remember way back when, in the very first beginning of this book, one of the first interactions between the two people speaking sounded very romantic or like romantically inclined, and we picked up on that right away because it was in contrast to like all the violence that had been happening prior to that. But it was unclear as to what they're doing. And here we get that again. We're at the end of that first chapter after her first two sexual encounters. Someone says, "What do you do?" Or the male speaking says, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm taking off my jumper. This is making me hot." Sorry, that wasn't the intention. I'm not complaining. Tell me more. And so we get more of this. So there is some interaction there that's going on. The other one I mentioned is that that I thought was interesting is that when she goes to Fafner Hermansson, he's like working on the typesetting machine, and he's setting a pamphlet on the nuclear threat for his aunt in the women's peace movement, because the nuclear threats show up here quite a bit and are sort of tied into a lot of the dates around here. And they also came up before with like certain dates were of atomic tests and whatnot. And I think that's one other thing that was like, that's very intentionally planted in there.
Yeah, that's throughout. There was also in the previous one a mention about communism and the agency it can provide women.
Yes.
Versus capitalism and the exploitation of women through capitalism, which is kind of brought up here slightly with that pamphlet kind of hinted at that again, kind of reminded us of that. But yeah, there's the whole nuclear age throughout all three sections that takes place as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
What did you think of this first one with it, instead of being rutting season and then the strike through and then right up spring instead? Because I mean, when you think of rutting, is that more of like an animalistic right?
It's like with like large mammals like moose and deer and antelope.
Rutting was the term, the Cox language in Radiant Terminus. It was like to rut. I always wanted to rut.
To make rut.
Make rut. Yeah. So it's very weird how we've managed to like link these two things. They like all made, these last three books in the series have all like made sense next to one another in a weird way.
But there's still something kind of, even with Rite of Spring, there's still something that's somewhat, I don't know if violent is the right word, but it's almost like it's like destined to happen. Like this is a force that's not going to be stopped. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I think there's also sort of like a sense of like the bacchanal or something. Like, you know, they're carrying out these rites, and there's that myth, that mythologizing again. And again, like the elevation. So that's actually really interesting, Brian. Like the straight through of the rutting season, like that's sort of in this sort of base, like real animalistic way, and then elevating it to the rite of spring of feeling sort of like, you know, like myth or sort of like operatic, you know?
Well, like the first thing I think of Stravinsky.
Yeah.
Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. And I know Sjón's a big music guy, and it almost kind of starts off with this weird oboe sound. It sounds like a dinosaur mating call, basically, right? And then it goes into this violent dun 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 dun. And as I was reading this woman's, you know, for it, like I couldn't get that sound out of my head of like this. It was, you know, kind of like violent and tragic at the same time, but
also super animalistic. It's like she's in heat. Like the way that it's described is like an animal in heat. So like a female, like they're gonna mate with a bunch of different, you know, male specimens in hopes of being impregnated by one of them, and she ends up being impregnated by all four.
Yeah, it is the alternate. It is the inverted of the normal stereotype too, of the male going and spreading his seed. She's like going out and collecting seed.
Collecting it, yeah.
They're also rite of spring because this is all going to deal like the rite of spring of like where animals and everyone start to procreate so that they will have, you know, continued existence. And this is all based around every child that's born in 1962, not to jump too far ahead. Begins on that day because her child will be the first one born in 1962. So the rite of spring does make sense in that just like very cyclical sense too.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to impose too much on it just from the, but it had me thinking as I was going through. And then I guess too, with it being, we've transitioned to a science fiction story, and again, like being the nuclear age, you think of all the, you know, science fiction that kind of bursts onto the scene at that time as well. But,
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so like this at the beginning of chapter 2 too, we've basically covered what was happening, but there's some of that stuff that you mentioned earlier too, Brian, about the capitalist versus communist sexual impulses or sexual agency of women. So there's a section right at the beginning of 2 so it's a common problem that when their children grew up and their husbands became increasingly preoccupied with their jobs, women were denied a natural outlet for their desires. And that sort of runs through here where she's like, yep, it's I want to have a kid, not happening. It's a problem with the marriage bed. And then she starts collecting lots of different things for the household. Like it's a very loaded sort of scene setting there before she like breaks free and decides to go out and go to these 4 different men.
I didn't read into it. Was there something you think into the occupation or the men that she went to?
I wondered about that, but I didn't track it at all.
No, I didn't track it.
Printmaker.
It was taxi, typesetter,
The ship
dude, and then the criminal that had assaulted her or raped her earlier, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing jumps to mind.
Because I was just wondering if there was a connection to the whole point with like wanting there to be a new man for a new time or a new age. And then it had mentioned here about with everything that takes place in 1961, 1962, and the importance of this generation of children. And so I don't know if there was something to that or not, but I didn't catch any meaning in it necessarily.
So this is really jumping ahead to 406. So her daughter that's going to be born out of this is Heldora Octavia. And the last paragraph that we read is the Icelandic public were to become familiar with this abrupt jerk of the head when Heldora Octavia became temporary governor of the central bank during the financial crisis of 2008 to 2009. And the thing that hit me there was like the financial crisis and like the implosion of the Icelandic economy is like a real thing that happened. Is very tragic and all fucked up and basically based in greed and poor use of money. But when she becomes temporary governor, does that mean that she's sort of the savior of the bank, or would she have been the person who was in charge when it happened?
I think she'd be like the steward. I think, like the temporary, I don't know, that's how I read it. I read it as sort of like the steward after the crisis.
After the crisis. Okay, that's what I did too.
Yeah, that's how I read it. I don't know enough about like the actual geopolitical happenings.
Right.
I would just blame Obama because that's like 2008. He gets elected. Crisis. See, I mean, that can't be a coincidence.
Well, the very first book we published came out on the fiction came out on the day of the crisis, so I also blame that as a coincidence.
The day.
Yeah.
You broke
broke the goddamn world. We broke everything. Yeah. So, but she's creating a female embryo of unique complexity. So in a sense, if we were talking about the male, our narrator, the Gollum becoming the new man, maybe she becomes the new woman out of these 4 different things, like your 4 different sperm things, like you're saying. And maybe then in the temporary governor being a positive thing, that all makes sense as like a sort of another alternate savior.
Well, yeah. Well, everything in here is a strange origin, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nothing's really.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what normal is, but nothing's really like what would be considered conventional. It's golem babies and 4 sperm into 1 egg and chickens inside of giants' mouths.
This is all how things happen, Brian. I don't know what you've been told. I mean, your wife's a surgeon. You should know better that this is all real.
Well, actually, I think that's a perfect time to talk about chapter 3, which totally brings it right back down to like the normal and basic and in real life. And I loved this section so much because it was such like a cool, like, you know, so much of, and I really enjoyed reading this, but like so much of it is funny or satirical or sort of overblown. And then this, it just like brought it back down to like real people, like what would be happening on the ground when all of this was going on. And I loved it. I loved all the professions that were mentioned and the places, and it was just.
My favorite is the ending part, right after the twins. The husbands lay with wives, lovers with mistresses, husbands with mistresses, lovers with wives, and also wives with mistresses, lovers with husbands, mistresses with mistresses, lovers with lovers. Though the unions produce no offspring other than enduring memories of the coupling. Rapists assaulted their victims, fingers, lips, and tongues stroked erogenous zones, penises were rubbed, licked, and sucked, buttocks were gripped, backs were clawed, wet pussies enclosed hard cocks, hymen story, ejaculations were premature, organs were achieved. Like that whole litany I was my favorite. What's that?
So that was your favorite?
That was, well, especially the beginning part of like the lovers with mistresses, husbands with all like that circulation of things became very like, again, like the cyclical or like this sort of like never ending switching I really liked. And then when it goes through the whole bit after that, I think it's kind of like brings it back down into something that's like more, you know.
Well, it's like the base. It's like the base. It's the most basic. Like, you know, you're moving from talking about, you know, these myths and these sort of abstract ideas of religion and of politics and of the making of countries to like basically, you know, penises and vaginas and like this is another way of creating life. Like there's been these these discussions of how life is created, and then here's this like little interlude of like of this other way, which is very basic and normal. The rest of it isn't normal, but here we have some normalcy. Right, and it does tie into like fingers and schoolgirls, for example. What's more normal than that?
True. There are. It does make it too. So like, if he's making the book's origin sort of very mythic, then this origin becomes very specific and diurnal or whatever.
Yeah.
Love it. That section is great. And then we get our interlude of the dance, which will come up a bunch through this volume, and more happens over that time. But all this is listing every child who was born in 1962 by date of their death. So like the first one died on January 13th, at 1 day old. The second girl was a girl who died the same day that she was born. The next one on January 21st, same day that she was born. So this is all ranked by the dates of their death. So this will extend beyond 1962, obviously, because some people will live longer. But you get to see like, but it's a weird way to order a system like that, because you'd think like if you're going to list all the children that were born in 1962, you could do it chronologically by their birth date. But doing it chronologically by their death date creates a wholly different way of sequencing them. And then it's kind of mythic. There are voices that are screaming. They're all waiting for the other brothers and sisters born in 1962 in this space, this sort of like post-life space.
I thought this was so chilling.
Yeah.
Like this last sentence, you know, we departed as quickly as we arrived. Dear brothers and sisters born in 1962, we await you here. I mean, it's like, that's what's like waiting for all of us. It's really intense. It's super
really
intense. I think it's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, and it also it reminded me of there's the religious themes that are really rich in every section here. Like even so, when you take off the dust jacket of the version that we have, it almost looks like an old, like an old Bible of some sort, right? And there's sections within like the Bible that are really boring, like Numbers, for instance, where it just who begat, like lineages and dates. That's really like they add some of the histories in there, or like one of the Gospels begins with telling you every single person that leads up to the lineage of Jesus. So it's like the first chapter is just like Obed gave birth to
begat
this person and this person and this. You're just like, oh my gosh, this is like there's part of it that reminded me of that, and then you get into this kind of like Bardo state at the end of like where they're, so it's kind of connecting the numerology with like a heaven space. Like just reminded me again that like there's a codex. The title's Codex, so there's something about like this being almost like a religious text, like a mythic origin text. Like, so to me, it kind of solidified that aspect of it again. It kind of reintroduced that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think like the choral aspect of this section, and then the one that comes later with the children again, the fact that there's like this real individual breakdown of these lives, yet at the same time, like at this point, wherever they are, they're acting in like choral unison, you know, and it's the we, you know, we're waiting for you.
Yeah.
Which is, like I said, it's really chilling.
It really is. The more that you say that, the more chilling it does seem too.
Yeah.
So I don't have anything else to add to that, because that will develop over the course of the next the end of the next 2 episodes of this, to the end of this volume, and take on even more weight, I believe. The next part, we go to God's blood section, in which it talks about God existing and suddenly knowing everything. I like you mentioned the italics part earlier. I like the italics in here of where it was essentially saying like, so just in the first paragraph, his consciousness was whole and undivided while being present in every nook and cranny of the world that was coming into being. And then in parentheses and italicized, StoneX - microchip. So like everything that could come into being goes from the StoneX to the microchip, all that encompassed. And then later on it has like, the glare was so dazzling that he instinctively raised a hand to shield them. Mosaic - Marburg, virus - parrot feathers, which is just like an interesting, that one doesn't immediately track the way that the other one did, but it's cool. And then like the last one is as the vapor of his breath blended with the color, phenomenon began to appear through a pink haze, nervous system of an earthworm - galaxy cluster MS0735. So like from that very specific earthworm to this very gigantic galaxy clusters. I dig that. Like I thought that was really cool. Then in the section, there's the talks all about everyone that was born. So the mentions like it's going to be the cohort of children born in 1962 who are all conceived between April 1st, 1961 and the end of that year. Then to list all the stuff that happened, all of which is true. The Hotel Saga in the middle there, I believe I stayed in that hotel, which is funny because I looked it up and was like, oh yeah, I think that's the hotel I stayed in. All that stuff happened, which is completely kind of normal and was documented in all respects but one, that in the 20 months during that year's quota of children was conceived and born, the vault of heaven rumbled with the most powerful nuclear explosions ever seen or heard on Earth. And then goes right in the nuclear thing of every third day for 690 days in a row, nuclear devices were detonated above ground, 139 by the Soviets, 86 by the Americans, 225 in all, with a combined explosive charge of 245,000 kilotons, or 7,000 times the power of Little Boy and Fat Boy. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, including, as they did, both Bomba and Starfish Prime, one of which caused the biggest explosion of all time on Earth, the other in the skies. So the radiation in Iceland's atmosphere had reached unprecedented levels. What happened was inevitable. Children of the 1962 generation mutated. So you get our birth origins, our nuclear stuff coming together right there. Although it gets paused for one chapter, but that will be, I think, that's well, in a way, I mean, that's kind of like not foreshadowing, but like atmospherically setting up what's happening with these kids. That we were seeing all the ones that died stillborn, but what happened to the ones who didn't die stillborn or didn't die within a month of their birth? Like what's their story growing up or being born in a world in which there's insane amounts. Like I don't think I knew about the atomic war and I've known about that stuff and I've read about it a lot. It's a pension thing. It's always been around. And especially like having grown up during the Cold War and being afraid that like Chernobyl was the end of my life. But I've never seen it written out like this in such specific and stark details. And that's fucking crazy. Like that is a crazy thing that people were doing to the earth and to each other and to tests at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Very understated, very obvious point, but like that does make it very stark to say it in that way.
There's a terrifying graphic you can watch. I think it's probably on YouTube or something, where it shows you a map of the world and a little blip happens every time there's a nuclear test that took place. And they give you that
before.
And then in 1960, like the whole world just goes on fire with nuclear tests. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I forget when they banned it, but you know, but yeah, like there's been a lot of nuclear devices set off.
And above ground too, like just like out in the open.
In the atmosphere and yeah. So.
Yeah, it's a good thing there's no climate change.
Do you think they purposefully did it Little Boy and Fat Boy? Because isn't it Fat Man and Little Boy?
That's what I thought too, but I didn't. I meant to look that up, but I didn't check. But I thought that too, and I can't remember if I was right or wrong.
I'm fairly positive it's one's Fat Man and one's Little Boy. But. Yeah,
that's what I thought as well. So whatever, tiny little copy reading error.
Maybe not. Maybe it's on purpose.
You think so?
Well, they're so stinking specific on everything else. I don't see why they would like. He researched how many liters of bodily fluid is required for 1,400 kids. Who's going to get the right bomb? Like, it's not a mistake.
But it's a translation error.
Maybe.
Not that it was, but
they don't.
It's Fat Man and Little Boy.
They don't make mistakes.
What is it?
Fat Man and Little Boy, absolutely. And the Tsar Bomba is real too. So, yeah.
That's a way cooler name.
It is. It is. Our Starfish Prime sounds like something straight out of like a Transformers movie.
That'd be a pretty weak one. Autobots roll out.
He transforms from a car into a starfish and just like lays there.
Plop and lays there.
Just nothing. Just a starfish. Anyways, okay.
A fighter jet, a big rig, and then a starfish.
One thing I just wanted to point out that I think is an interesting contrast in this section is the characterization of this God figure, and it's like God is depicted as this sort of, he's holding his hand before his mouth in delight. He's surprised, he's astonished by like discovering what's, the light that comes from his mouth and all of that. And then, contrasting that with the frenzy, the war hungry frenzy of the humans on the ground, I think is really interesting too. Like there's this depiction of energy and the way that God is using energy, the light, the energy that's streaming from his self, and that sort of like astonishment and delight and radiance, as opposed to the way that that we're using energy. At the same time. Divine energy versus like our destructive energy. Yeah. Interesting. It's just something that's in the same chapter. Like I'm wondering, like, what's the connection between these two sections? Like starting it with God's blood, and then I don't know. That's what I was trying to. I was wondering if it was like the way that God's depicted here is like the instant the word sprang to his lips, God acquired sight. He saw that he was omnipresent. The way that it depicts to me, it makes me feel like he just like came into being. In a sense of like, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm God. And they can see everything and knows everything, but everything's been set in motion. And that then the human part of it is kind of set in motion in this way that's ultimately destructive. And that was referenced earlier on with like the Gabriel sections where it's like after Gabriel's like, I'm not going to destroy the world. Humans will do it for themselves. And like, it feels almost like maybe those two things, like this shock of awareness versus like this human drive. Yeah. Death drive. Mm-hmm. I don't know. You guys want to move on to section 2, which is a little bit more confusing because it's sort of explained later as to what's going on, but we can sort of make that make sense.
Sure. So I think also though that word ping, that might be, I'm trying to remember, it might be John chapter 1 in the beginning was the word. Yeah. Like God through speaking, everything comes into existence. I think that's a riff on that, but yeah,
for sure. For sure. So the agency seems different in the biblical version versus this.
Yeah.
So 2, tape A, taking place in June 2009. So we've jumped a lot of years. This is set up as the CEO, or as this famous geneticist who, is he named in here? Because he's named later.
Yeah. Or something H, than H, Magnuson.
Yeah. Magnuson, yeah. I know that it's named later. I couldn't remember if it's right here either. So he is sitting at a party at his like sort of whatever resort on the sea, whatever. And his fourth wife is having a party, an annual June 17th party, in which tons of people come. And he is drinking a very expensive bottle of Japanese single malt, thinking about it and recording himself talking about his life, or he maybe will be talking about his life. So far, all he's really recorded is basically his saying things like, this is where I became the man I am, a little to the east of Sandy. And then he talks a little bit about going on a trip with his father, in which they went fishing, and deals with this whole idea of like trout just being the trout, like man being the man. And then it ends with where his father was also a geneticist, I believe, correct?
Wasn't he a politician?
A politician. That his politician father is talking to his mother, and his mother has a copy of Morgenbladet and has the headline "Sleeping Pill Thalidomide: Thousands of Children Left with Birth Defects" as part of that. So there's a hint here that there's maybe something that had gone on with like the various drugs that are created. This guy's a geneticist. He might be somehow related to that. He's accepted a gift from the whiskey he's drinking is a gift from a drugs giant, CEO of a drugs giant company, that, automatically by premising those two things, the feeling that he has throughout this of some sort of guilt or having screwed something up, and then ending with this thousands of children left with birth defects sort of ties those things together without making them super, super, super explicit. This is a dumb note, but for whatever, I don't know if there's a reason for this, but Sjón mentions September 25th like multiple times in this book. And usually September 25th, 1976. And I don't know why that is, but it shows up twice in this section. I couldn't find any reason for it exactly, unless it's just map the dates between things. I just noticed those ones because that's like right around my birthday. I was 1 year old.
Always got to make it about yourself, Chad.
I always do. I only notice numbers that are about me. Like I noticed, yeah, I noticed very bad numbers. Yeah, I don't know what else to put into this section right now. Oh,
I have a question. I wonder what you guys thought of this. So after that little part where he's describing like watching his parents in the car and then seeing the newspaper. And then he describes like what the children with the birth defects look like. And then he says, 2 weeks later, his mother went to Denmark for an operation on her leg.
I circled that.
Abortion?
Oh.
Like I think the mother was pregnant, and the mother had taken the sleeping pills as well. And she's just like mad with the father because he's comforting her in the car. Like they're not arguing, they're not fighting in the car. He's putting his arms around her. She's wiping her, wiping her face. And then it's like this whole description of the children born with birth defects. And then 2 weeks later, his mother goes to Denmark for an operation on her leg.
Right.
What you would tell like your kids or whatever if you had to go and have an abortion in the 60s or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
That's true. That's wild. I marked it and was like, I'm not sure what this is, but that's totally makes sense. Yeah.
Because there's also other little things like in the previous chapter 4, it mentions Watson and Crick, right? Those are the DNA guys. And then here he throws the bottle against the ship. It's RNA, right? Yeah. And so there's something going on with the birth defects, the genes, DNA, RNA, whatever. So I don't know.
I mean, you do get this line too, where this is a long sentence, but whereas these days, the crumbling boat merely served as a reminder of all the hours the geneticist had promised to spend with his younger son restoring it, making it watertight, painting and relaunching it, but which he had in fact spent dashing around the world, peddling the northern lights that shimmered in the Icelander's jeans.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that also, this is super, not way off subject, but it led me down a rabbit hole, is I was checking every so often to see if these things are real. And he says that on page 381, that at the end of June 1962, the summer he turned 13, he had been on the way home from a trip to town with his fellow workers. They'd seen The Woman Eater, a film about a mad scientist called Dr. Moran, who, with the help of the drummer Tonga, son of the king of the rainforest, feeds young women to a flesh-eating Amazonian tree and uses the resin to develop a serum to bring the dead back to life. Feels like a very weighted reference, obviously. But what's fun is that if you go look this up on Wikipedia, The Woman Eater was shown in, it was initially shown, hey, where did this go? Yeah, okay, so it was shown and released in the UK in 1958 by Eros Films on a double bill with the Swedish crime drama Blonde in Bondage. So the two things are Blonde in Bondage and The Woman Eaters.
Who says capitalism is taking advantage of women or whatever? No way.
No.
Absolutely not. Hollywood would never do anything like that.
Oh, man,
that's interesting though, because again, we're talking about the atomic age, right? And then just the difference between using clay, like a clay golem, and now it seems like it's kind of hinting towards manipulating genetics and right. It's the nuclear age of how to create a monster.
Yep. And like all the gene stuff that went on there, all the pills that were being given out, all that stuff was very damaging. So it is playing around with energies that one shouldn't be playing around with. Perhaps. So 3 is childhood, which goes from 62 to 1972. And this is the first time that our narrator of this whole myth of his birth and his mom and everything like that is described. And what he's described as is it's the beginning of chapter 6. He's middle-aged, borderline soft in the belly, dressed conservatively. All that's kind of fairly normal. And then Joseph Loeb, on the crown of his head, his forehead and jaw, the skin is stretched tight over strange bony excrescences, and the same bony growths, only larger, are visible on what can be seen of his arms, rib cage, and legs. So this quote-unquote golem is also like now is much older, is whatever time this is being set, but has bone growths all over his body, unnatural seeming bone growths all over his body. Then I got to remember where this is. Then we go back to a little bit about Hrafl Magnuson, and who tells like a very funny story about being afraid of horrors, which is interesting because that's then completely contrasted with how he goes to a strip club and waits for Aleta, the Ukrainian girl, to come see him. Aleta's a trans, and she comes in and ends up being the person who is interviewing Yosef to put this all together in the backwards order. So we're not told that sequentially, but there's no way to talk about it without it being referred to. So she's working for this guy who is the chief executive of CoDex, hence we get CoDex 1962, CoDex of the years of all the 62 children, and that this woman is the one who's conducting this interview with Joseph Lowe, who has been telling us the story of his birth for 380 some pages. So now our frame has changed. That's what I mean by like the third, if you didn't get to the third volume of this, and it won't, for another 50 pages, a lot more gets unveiled over the next 100 pages. But like it doesn't, I don't know if it clicks for everyone. Like you get the story of like that romantic sort of Victorian Germanic thing in volume 1, and volume 2 you have this kind of weird caper. And then volume 3, all of a sudden it's like reframing over like what this guy's been telling about his life. And now it's in a wholly new, more expansive space.
So, and all those times where like the little conversations, like the little asides that are happening are between Yosef and Aleta, this trans stripper who's turned researcher for CoDex.
Exactly. And there's a reference too that we'll get to in a second, where she talks about like recording things for too long, that they're only supposed to be 2 hours long, but she like lets that go. And also that she's not supposed to have a personal relationship with the subjects that she's interviewing, but she does. There's one other thing about the geneticist here. So we get him in that last chapter being sort of remorseful, it seems, or whatever, but he's almost feels sympathetic. And then here it's like this is where she finds the tapes. So the tape that we just heard, she has found when she's doing this recording, because she has the dictaphone, the tape that he used is in this dictaphone. So she starts listening to it and she says, the geneticist's voice was familiar to every child in the country. Even the least talented could make a decent stab at mimicking it. For years, he had been a regular on radio and TV news and chat shows in his role as chief executive of the genomics biotechnology company CoDex, which had from day one been reporting news of incredible scientific advances. Due to controversy over the company's access to the Icelanders' medical records, from which it was creating a database of the nation's genetic information, the so-called Book of Icelanders, an idea sold to Parliament and public on the pretext of its benefits to mankind. The Icelanders' pure genomes were to be used for discoveries that would liberate the inhabitants of planet Earth from every imaginable disease, from cancer to the common cold, though it appealed primarily to people's sense of nationalism and greed, and as it later turned out, the project was bankrolled by overseas drug giants. Due to its successes on the financial markets at home and abroad, due to CoDex's subsequent bankruptcy and the fact that so many people, carried away by the talk of genetic purity and massive profits, had bought shares in the miracle, due to the resurrection and refinancing of the company, due to its idiosyncratic views on Iceland's history and culture, and such as literature. Sorry, it goes on, but it seemed like an important part of like, that now frames him differently than how we saw in that tape before. So we hear him talking and telling that story and leading up to the genetic defects, and now it's like he was creating this sort of genetic database of all the Icelanders theoretically to help them, but like it feels like greed and other manipulations of like drug markets have somehow sullied that or used it in different ways.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we get that what her deal is, what she's interviewing are people who have severe genetic disorders, such as this mermaid woman who has fish skin across her body.
And there's something fairly terrifying about hearing the words genetic purity and then knowing that we had like Nazis and KGB and then drug capitalism. Like there's something very, the context of that just, it's very, very frightening. And it kind of makes me wonder too about, when he's talking about the history of Iceland, because I've heard lots of, discussions about how homogenous it is there and how protected and just tiny it is there, and that there's not a lot of genetic diversity necessarily in Iceland. So I wonder if there is some commentary on that with what he's saying here. Well, I'll find out later, I guess, but it did make me think of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely not framed in a positive way.
No.
Linking genetic purity and the massive profits. Chad, if you had kept reading, you would have read my favorite sentence.
Oh well, I'm glad that I didn't then, so you can save it for the end.
I will.
So so that I don't know if there's anything else to add to this part right now. Overseas drug giants make me nervous every time.
I do have a question. Yeah. So are we to assume that the birth defects from the radiation from the nuclear testing has created these mutations in these subjects? Like, are those the things that are linked? Right, obviously, or not?
That's at this moment in time, and from my memory, that's my assumption too, is that that mutated the children of Iceland. Although there is that alternate line of that these drugs that were being given, the flipper baby could be as well. So like, and if CoDex is being funded by drug giants, we get the drug giant part again. But maybe these two things aren't separated.
Okay.
But then I thought there was also the part where his toes were messed up from the shoe box. So there's like a different way you could be defected as well. Yeah. But it's all the parents' fault. It's all a sin of the father. No, but it's always
the father's fault.
It's some way there's some sort of sin of the father that's causing this problem in the children.
Yeah.
That's really
in different ways, obviously, right?
And the fact that Aletta's transition seems important too, because she then becomes more sympathetic by not being part of that, part of their thing, part of this male shit. Anything else with that chapter? We have like 2 left.
You do?
Yeah, 7, which is very short, which is like the where she explains like what her instructions are, that she's not supposed to. She's supposed to just interview these people. It's not supposed to last for more than 2 hours. And she asks them a series of questions. And the questions include like memorable incident and memorable dream, which I think is wonderful. That's very fun. And then she always goes over because it doesn't seem like anyone seems to care. So that and what she's doing at least according to 395, is that these recordings would be the sole surviving witness to these lives, the only chance that the participants would have to tell their story in their own words, their own voices. And so she interviews the woman with the fish skin who was born on September 25th, 1962. So there's a second September 25th in this little part. So I knew it was in there twice for some reason. But so she interviews her for a while. That I don't know if there's anything to add about that, to be honest.
Well, just think about like D. How is Yosef supposed to answer parents, origin, education, occupation?
I believe that is I believe that's the question that you'll find out that they're stuck on. That's
okay.
the part they got in the interview is through the first 2 volumes is that one, parents,
origin, it's
education, and occupation.
Yeah.
350 pages. When childhood residence, that's complicated.
Yeah.
I'll bury a box. And then we get, I don't know if there's anyone have anything else for 7?
Just one line on 396.
Okay.
So like, you have the geneticist like sort of repeating, this is where I came to be me. She turns off the tap, lowers herself in the bath, blah, blah, blah. And feeling the tiredness flowing out of her body as she listened to the geneticist attempting to understand himself. Like, I think that's so key. Like, that's what all of this is this attempt to understand oneself.
You almost read my favorite line.
Oh. There you
go. Yeah, that's very true. So like getting, and that because the tapes are coming back too, obviously.
Yeah.
All these 3 lines are going to be woven together of like what's happening across those paces. Yeah. So we get in this first section, like the first third of this that we're talking about today, we really get all of the building blocks of what this volume will be, and seeing them play out is really going to be the next 2. But we have the dance, we have the geneticist tapes, we have her interviews, and we have a story of like his perspective, what that's related to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just love this, like, is sort of just like this kind of like brief glimpse of like what the whole project is, like of this book, understanding himself, understanding ourselves, as Sjón understanding himself through the writing.
Yeah. It's very, love it. It's great. This book is really great. 8 brings him back to himself and tells like of how when he was born, he could remember everything because he was born fully, like we had mentioned before. He was nursed by a black nanny goat. So he was never nursed by a mother's breast. And then, then this is the other one that like my other favorite line I'm going to save for the end too. I'll say it now. My other favorite line is on 403. Leo was creating a savior to deliver an important message to a new age, not an insatiably bloodthirsty monster like those who had pushed the world over a precipice while the precipice had looked the other way.
I love that too. I had that highlighted. I just have something though. So this is interesting. Sorry. So Dora. Sorry, this is not related to that, but Haldora, right? Which they call, she calls her Dora. The geneticist, one of his wives was named Dora. So was the geneticist married to this child of 4 fathers?
If I remember right, we do get to know about all 4 of his wives.
Okay.
But that's a really good catch. And I'm pretty sure, but again, I read this a while ago, and some of those details get a little bit.
Like at that party, he's talking about like at the party, his wife, his 4th wife, Dora, blah blah, and then
how you do it.
That's the child's name.
Where is that? Yeah, I'm trying to find it too, but yeah, that makes sense, and that's a really good connection there. Going forward,
connections.
So many connections. Yeah, and she has 1 blue eye and 1 brown, which is another notable thing. So if there's a Dora with 1 eye blue and 1 brown, we'll know for certain. And that's when they talk about his toes. The toes are all fucked up, probably because he was crushed in the box. And therefore, that's going to lead to him having stone growths all over himself. Or some sort of other explanation with meddling with people's genes or shooting up, nuclear radiation into the atmosphere.
That's what happens when you don't put the cap back on the Play-Doh. Gets all crusty and gross.
It's true. That's true. It's a fair point.
Yeah.
Wasn't keeping him milked very well with that goat's milk either. Remember, he was a little neglectful of that.
Better bathe that Play-Doh in milk.
I didn't understand why that mother, but so that Dora gets both nanny goat milk and breast milk. Why does she need the nanny goat milk for? She's nursed, and then the Gollum only gets the nanny goat.
He now has a name, but we'll just keep calling him the Gollum because that's Gollum Low. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they're not very sympathetic. That Mrs. Thorstenstein and I don't think that this baby Dora seems kind of insipid. I think she's not characterized very well either. I don't know if we're to like her or not.
That's why I wasn't sure about that last section, that last paragraph. Now comes back to that. Is like because it's set up in that way where they're like Hela has funny looking toes. He's speaking like that baby language to him. And then it says like they're gonna remember this. So the bit before that is Haldora Octavia jerked her head and sucked on her dummy with a loud smack. The Icelandic public were to become familiar with this abrupt jerk of the head when Haldora Octavia becomes temporary governor of the central bank. So I just thought, it's like it really left that either ambiguous or like it seemed sinister to me.
Well, it's also. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's the interesting juxtaposition of that, and because right before it was Lo wanting to share whatever milk he had, and them not reciprocating and sharing. Right. So there's the selfishness.
Yeah.
Then it's the economics.
So on 402, it's like the 15-year-old Haldora Octavia was perched on her mother's arm like a princess on her throne, dressed in a velvet pinafore with a lace collar and sucking on a dummy with loud smacking sounds. Mother and daughter filled the doorway as if intending to block our exit. Leo looked at the woman inquiringly. She didn't react. It's like.
Yeah. Let me say somewhere here, right around there's like I could sense my father's discomfort.
Yeah, he felt embarrassed because he's like standing there and it looks like a chimpanzee shitting in his pants.
Yeah, okay, there we go. There it is.
Which is so funny. It's like that's such a funny image. Perfect. You can perfectly imagine how he's standing.
Yeah.
And he's like trying to be so polite, and she's like, she's very hoity-toity.
Yep. So there we have it for this week. That is everything that we're going to cover. So this is a big section to get through because usually these have been like 4 or 5 chapters that were like longer. With this 8 parts plus the dance, like we really do get a lot of things laid out that really set forth this volume, like I mentioned. But I think it's really cool. This is the section that I really loved because I feel like it's more of the juxtaposition of images and the plot lines coming back together and being woven together in a way that's not completely linear that really appeals to me and is more indicative of Sjón's writing nowadays than maybe the first volume, which feels very different than what he's been writing in his other shorter books that have come out over the past few years. Although I love the beginning parts too, and I love volume 2 a lot. I like this particularly. I like the imagery. I like the way that he's handling all these different elements and like bouncing them off one another. I think is really cool, personally.
Can I read my favorite sentence?
You can. Read your favorite sentence. You're gonna go first.
Okay, because you just sort of introduced that, which I think is great. All right, so on page 388, it's the last sentence, like right where you stop reading chat about why he's so well known. And due to his idiosyncratic views on Iceland's history and culture, and especially its literature, since he made a big deal of his youthful dream of becoming an author, and claimed that all his tinkering with his juvenile scribblings had, when the time came, given him the edge over his foreign competitors who were unacquainted with the Icelandic cottage industry of, quote, rolling out a plot. It's so funny.
It's great.
The cottage industry.
Yeah.
Rolling out a plot. Just a funny little wink.
Yeah, that's very true. I like that a lot too. That's really good. Do you have a favorite one, Brian?
Probably. Let's see. I thought maybe this will come back in some other way, but I really enjoyed on 403 on the first full paragraph there at the end of it. Leo was creating a savior to deliver an important message to a new age, not an insatiably bloodthirsty monster like those who had pushed the world over a precipice while the precipice had looked the other way.
Yep, that was my absolute favorite line. But then,
Oh, I'm sorry, I could pick something different.
no. That's cool. Because the other one that I had was after you talked about her listening to the geneticist tapes and the geneticist attempting to understand himself. This is really like basic. But the last two parts of that bit are now she knew more about him than he did about her. She would never return the tape. And I like that part too. Like it feels very powerful.
Mm.
But that's all I've got. So next week, I usually have this online and open so I can tell you guys what we're going to be talking about.
Oh, there's a great one on 365 after all of the promiscuity, and then she has the baby. But the Thorsten family were Christians.
That's right. I forgot about that's a great line.
The child comes out like some pagan symbol on his forehead. The first baby is 62, but wait, we're Christians.
Oh man! So next week we'll release the podcast version of this on July 4th in celebration of our nation's heritage, and we'll be covering pages 407 through 450, which goes between one episode of the dance and chapter 9 through and up to the next episode of the dance and chapter 12. So yeah, but page 407 to 450 in the US version anyways is the pages that we'll be going over next week. I don't have anything to add. Do you guys have anything? Katie, I meant to ask you this at the beginning. Did you read? You didn't read the beginning two parts of this, correct?
No, I read the first chapters of the first two parts.
Interesting.
Oh.
So how was it coming into this cold like that?
Well, I still listen to the podcast, so I kind of kept up.
Right.
I like spoilers. Like I don't always have to read or watch something. I like to just do the recaps.
Yeah.
But, thank you, vulture.com. But I mean, so I was familiar like with these. I mean, I think I was familiar with like sort of who the main players were.
Right.
But I was surprised. I had to say, like, I was a little surprised at the sexual nature of the beginning. Not that I'm a prude, Chad, like you, a Puritan, and you're.
Yeah.
But
I am.
But like, if you think like taking it as like a separately, independently published novel for the first pages of like a novel, if you had never read anything else of this saga, and then you pick this up in 2016, it's heavy, like, and it's funny. It's. I mean, I really should have brought my Spanish fan to part because. But honestly, I thought, wow, okay, he's just gonna jump right in there. But yeah, I see what you're saying about it setting up these sort of like different threads that are going to be tied together in this last section, because there are sort of these parallels that are running together. And actually, that was such a cool image too. I know we have to go.
No, we don't.
Well, I have to go get my children.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But I love that image when they talk about like when you have the ball, when you card a ball of wool and you have like the big tangled mess of wool. And when you card it and every single strand lies side by side, you know, you can cover a whole room. Yeah. And I think that's like a great metaphor for what's happening probably in this last book, is that here you have like this tangled knot, all these different elements that as he goes like carding them and pulling things through, it'll be sort of a different whole, which is great.
That's true. That's true. And brings back to the very first 2-month review of Rodrigo Frazan writing all of his stuff in parallel, writing that book in parallel. No, he doesn't write all of his books that way, but he wrote the 7 sections of the invented parts simultaneously on different days of the week. It reminds me of that, of like that. Yeah, everything gets melded together when you put it together in one way, but if you separate it and think about things in a different way, it becomes much clearer.
Huh. Well,
I think that makes sense. I don't know. Anyways, where can people find you online, Katie, or what should they look for your work?
Well, I'm not really online. So don't worry.
I just reported a podcast about how none of us should use the internet. And
I really don't. I mean, I'm not on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. It's a private account. You can request to be my friend. You can see pictures of my kids. No,
this is like Isaac.
You can read. You can read three forthcoming translations in the Brooklyn Rail this summer and in translation by Lara Marino. Those are coming out, and you can read an excerpt from The Communist Daughter, the novel, in the Michigan Quarterly. And what else is coming out?
That's fantastic. That's a great publication.
Yeah, I'm really excited about those. What else? And then and the Los Angeles Review is going to be publishing something soon too, another short story. So, but I don't have like an aggregate platform yet.
Okay.
And I don't want one, but I suppose I have to have one. But
if there are things, we'll link to them in the show notes. If there are things that are out there already that I can link to.
Yeah, there are some links to some other things some stories that were published online this past spring.
True. Perfect, Brian.
Great, thank you for having me on. This was great.
Oh, of course, it's super fun. It's super fun. Brian, everyone go buy Brian's books. He won't say it himself. It's Storytime Killbox, boaeditions.org, your favorite independent bookstore can pre-order it for you. Get him on the bestseller list. Everyone listening to this, get Brian's short story collection on the bestseller list. So order 20 copies each.
Yeah,
That would be fun.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have anything else to add. Thank you, Katie, for joining us from Spain. And Brian, I will talk to you soon.
All righty.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.